Chapter 17. The following morning at breakfast, I told Crockett we had to go back. I half expected him to ask me why, but he didn't. "When you leavin'?" was his animated response. He almost seemed glad. "After we eat." I glanced at Bo, and she looked down at her plate. Crockett asked me to pass him the sugar, then told Brooks to hurry so they could get to the mine before it got too hot. Bob and Juanita came in and sat down. "See any mountain lions last night?" Crockett quipped. "But I don't want to go," I blurted suddenly. "I like it here. I'd like to stay." "Then what's the problem?" Crockett wanted to know. "It's Charlie and the family. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I gotta go back, but I really don't want to." Crockett sipped at his coffee. Then he looked at me. "What kind of agreements you got with this man?" "Agreements? I don't have any agreements." As I spoke the words, it dawned on me what Crockett was driving at. What he'd been driving at for the past 3 days. I realized that I had all kinds of agreements with Charlie. I'd agreed to Helter Skelter, to spending the rest of my life, even eternity, with the family, to Charlie's philosophy, to all kinds of things. Crockett leaned back in his chair and rolled a cigarette from a can of Bugler. "Why don't you go down and ask Charlie to release you of all your agreements? Then you'll feel free to do something else." "Think he would?" "How the hell do I know? Ask him and find out." I watched as Crockett exhaled 2 streams of smoke through his nose. "I will," I said. "Ask him to release me," Brooks said. "Me too," Juanita chimed in. "And me," Bo sputtered, setting down her cup. After breakfast, Crockett and Brooks walked Bo and me down to the mouth of the wash and helped us load the pickup with mining tools Crockett wanted dropped off in Ballarat. We climbed into the cab and fired up the engine. "Hurry back, Paul," Brooks said. "Yeah," Crockett said with a grin. "I got a bunch more games we can play out here." It takes 10 hours to drive from Goler Wash to Spawn's Ranch. That's a lot of time to think. It sounded easy. Just ask Charlie to release you of all your agreements. But would he? What would he say? Just what agreements? Did it mean rejecting everything? Did I want to reject everything? Could I? Could Bo or Brooks or Juanita? Was Helter Skelter real, or was it all in Charlie's head? Was Crockett right? That if we put our attention on Helter Skelter, we would make it happen. Reject, release, take your attention away. It sounded good, but it wasn't simple. For more than a year, I'd been programmed to do the opposite, to relax and float downstream, to cease to resist, to submit, to be one with Charlie's love. The closer I got to LA, the more apprehensive I became. Bo slept most of the way, but woke up near Saugus to express her own apprehension, her fear of Charlie. "I don't know if I can do it, Paul. How can we tell Charlie we want out? And if the shit comes down, what are we gonna do?" By the time we drove into Spawn's, I had decided, not that I would leave Charlie, I was incapable of making that decision, but that I wanted the option to be able to leave if I so desired. In order to do that, I knew I'd have to do as Crockett suggested. Spawn's ranch at night was generally quiet. The flies disappeared. So did the tourists. The wranglers went home. Walking along the boardwalk, I sometimes had the feeling that the hillsides were closing in. If you stopped in one place and listened, you could hear the crickets, and intermittently, the horses would snort and raise a ruckus. With the lights on, the lights from George's house, the saloon, and tack room, the movie sets looked even more authentic. Living on a movie set, you develop a consciousness of acting. That's how I felt the night Beau and I drove onto the property, like an actor waiting in the wings to speak his lines. It was dark, probably around 9 p.m. when I parked Danny's pickup beside the corral and, seeing a light coming from the semi-trailer bed, walked over there with Beau. I could hear Charlie's voice as we approached. I glanced at Beau, then climbed the stairway, pulled down the flap, and went inside. Charlie was seated on a stool at the head of the trailer, facing me from behind a low table. A gooseneck lamp to his right illuminated his face. Nearly all the family was present and sat in front of the table and along the sides of the trailer on mattresses. In one corner behind Charlie was a mattress on which Pooh Bear and Zizos were sleeping. Charlie grinned and got to his feet as I entered with Beau right behind me. "Hey, brother, welcome back." "Hi, Beau." We greeted everyone and Charlie sat down, still smiling. "How's things going at Barker's?" "Good." "Brooks and Juanita?" "They're doing fine." I leaned against the side of the trailer with Beau beside me. Snake and Weesh sat directly in front of us. "So are we, brother. Danny just delivered a whole shitload of dune buggy parts. Clem's bringing in a rebuilt engine for the big semi. We're ready now. Ready for Helter Skelter." Before Charlie could say another word, I broke in. I heard myself speaking, but it was as if I had no control over the words. "Hey, I found out why we had all that trouble getting our shit up to Barker's ranch. Why we had them breakdowns and busts." Charlie gave me a quizzical look. "There's this old prospector up there, a guy named Crockett, a far-out old dude. Said he put a psychic gate across the canyon. No one could get in unless they have true love in their hearts." Charlie sniggered. "Oh, yeah. So what else is new?" "Not much, except I'd like to ask you something." I felt Beau flinch. "Anything, brother." "I'd like to be released of all my agreements." The eyes of the family turned on me. "Me too," Beau said. Charlie's hesitation was only momentary. His eyes were hard on mine. Then he laughed. "Agreements? Oh, sure, brother. I release you of all agreements." "Brooks and Juanita, too," Beau declared, her voice barely audible. Sure, I release you. Ain't no agreements." As Charlie spoke, I felt all his attention directed on me, but he didn't break stride. He went right on talking about Helter Skelter and what was coming down, and that it wouldn't be much longer before we'd be going to the desert. It's hard to tell what Charlie was thinking, but what I said clearly disturbed him. He may have thought that I was testing him, and probably figured, rather than start a scene in front of the family, he would confront me later, which is what he did. Just minutes after the gathering in the trailer adjourned, Charlie came looking for me. I had left the trailer and walked down to the saloon to see if my BSA was still parked inside the door. I found it under a canvas tarp and wheeled it out on the boardwalk to check out the ignition switch. When Charlie knelt beside me and asked what I was up to, I told him I wanted to take the bike back to Barker's and use it to shuttle supplies up the canyon. "Yeah, sure," Charlie said, dismissing my remarks. "What's all this talk about agreements? Who's this guy, Crockett?" "Just a guy that's living up there with Brooks and Juanita. Him and a friend named Bob. They're mining gold up behind the ranch." I stood up, and Charlie stood beside me. "What are they, pigs?" "No, Charlie. They've been filling your head with this agreement stuff. What's that supposed to mean?" "It just means I don't want to get hung up, man. I want to feel free to come and to..." "You are free. Anyone hanging on to you?" Charlie's voice tightened. "I don't see any chains on you. Look, brother, I'm the one guy who knows what free is and what isn't. We're all free here. We're not locked in the joint or in the heads of those straight piggy rat fuckers from Bel Air. We're free to lead the young love when the shit comes down." He flicked the hair from his eyes. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we have been a little hung up, waiting around. But the time's coming. It's now, man. We're gonna have to show Blackie how to do it. Then we go to the desert. And there ain't no psychic gate that's gonna keep us out." Charlie rubbed his hand across his face. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked frazzled and wrung out. He said, "Get some sleep, brother. That's a long drive." I got the BSA running, then grabbed a parachute out of the trailer and hiked up to the outlaw shacks. I'd no more than wrapped myself up inside the chute when I heard someone coming, then a voice. "Paul, Paul." It was Snake. "Yeah, over here." I could see her figure silhouetted in the doorway as she stepped inside, then walked over to the corner of the room where I'd laid down. She lay beside me and I put my arm around her. "You're leaving, aren't you?" "I guess so." "Why?" "I'm not sure. I don't..." "But Helter Skelter is coming down." "Yeah." Snake took off her dress and crawled inside the chute. Her body was cool and firm. She told me the scene was getting heavier, but that Charlie had said it wouldn't be long. She said, too, that she had missed me. I knew Charlie had sent her, but it didn't matter. What I had going with Snake didn't depend on Charlie. We made love and talked and listened to the crickets. Holding on to Diane Lake, her beauty, her innocence, was like holding on to all that was left of the family, wanting to keep it and preserve it, but not being able to. I slept only about 4 hours. By sunrise the next morning, I was riding my BSA through the Antelope Valley, bound for the Barker Ranch. It was July 11th, less than a month away from the Tate LaBianca murders. I arrived at Barker's late in the afternoon and slept all that night and most of the day. When I woke up and staggered into the living room around 5 p.m., Crockett was sitting at the table playing solitaire. "Coffee in here," he muttered. "Hot." I went into the kitchen and poured a cup, then walked in and sat down across from Crockett. "Where's Brooks?" "Beats me." Crockett finished the game and grinned. Then he scooped up the cards, stacked them, and stuck them back in the box he kept in his shirt pocket. He lit a cigarette. "Well?" I told him what had happened with Charlie and that I wanted to stay at Barker's for a while. I told him I didn't know whether I was leaving the family for good, but that I wanted my freedom, and I wanted to learn some things from him, maybe about mining, maybe about music. "What can you do?" he asked at last. "What do you mean?" "What are you good at?" "I can hustle." "You can what?" Crockett squinted. "I'm good at hustling things. I can get things." "You mean stealing?" "Nah, I don't have to steal." "Can you hustle some good food? We need supplies. That means driving to Vegas." Sure, no sweat." "Good. You can take Stanley's truck." "Who's Stanley?" "Bob Barry's brother. He loaned us his truck. It's down at the base of the wash." "Green pickup?" "That's it." Crockett got up and fished inside his pants pocket. He pulled out some change and handed it to me. "That's all the money I got." 29 cents? Gee, thanks. "And no stealing. Just hustle." "What about gas?" "Some gas drums in the back of the truck. Enough to get you there." Crockett handed me the keys and we walked to the front gate. I told Crockett I'd be back in a couple of days with all the food he could handle. Then I started down the canyon. I found the truck at the base of the wash and drove it to Ballarat. From there, I traveled by way of Shoshone, then cut across the Pahrump Valley to Vegas on the Blue Diamond Road, arriving late in the afternoon. Coming from Death Valley into Los Angeles is like leaving one dream to enter another, an oasis or nightmare, depending on your view. At night, from a distance, it seemed like one of civilization's crowning achievements. On closer inspection, it's nothing but a surrealistic mirage. By day, it looks like what it is, a string of casinos and motels flanked by rundown suburbs and a man-made lake. It has a border town ambience and enough vice to soak blood out of a turnip. A safe way to come to Vegas, and the many way people leave it, is the way I arrived. Broke. It was dark by the time I entered a casino on the Strip and cashed in my 29 cents for a quarter. With it, I played a slot machine and lost before adjourning to the parking lot to sleep in the pickup. I spent the next day hustling food. First, I hit the supermarket garbage bins and salvaged a few canned goods. There were some fruit and very ripe avocados, but without ice, they would never survive the trip back. After that, I cleaned up in a restroom and began a door-to-door campaign soliciting donations in food for a needy group in the desert. I got all I could handle. By 11 a.m., my truck was loaded with vegetables, fruit, boxes of cereal, spices, and poultry. I had 3 live chickens, a rooster, 2 watermelons, and 2 dozen eggs. That afternoon, I drove to Shoshone, listening to the reports of the Chappaquiddick incident on the radio. The following morning, I gave a guy a chicken to fill my gas tank and headed for home. 4 hours later, I parked the truck at the base of the wash. After loading all the food I could carry in a makeshift backpack, I stuffed 2 chickens in my shirt and started up the gulch on my motorcycle. eager to show Crockett what I'd gotten and slightly vexed at myself for undertaking the project without some assistance. I was chugging at a good clip along the alluvial fan, my mind on Crockett and Charlie and all the changes that were coming down, when I hit a rock. The chicken squawked raucously as I flew ass over elbows and came down nose first on the rocks. Cursing, I got to my feet and began hobbling around to retrieve what I could. Boxes of dried food, cans, fruit, and a few eggs that had miraculously survived. I finally managed to corral the chickens, one of which was only half alive, and laboriously made my way up the wash on foot. Crockett and Brooks were on the porch when I got there, Brooks strumming the guitar, Crockett playing solitaire. Brooks came running down to meet me. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah, take some of this shit, will ya?" Crockett greeted me with a bemused smile. "Did okay, huh?" "Yeah." I slumped to the porch and leaned against the wall, dumped my bike down there. Still some stuff in the truck. "I'll go down." Brooks grabbed a pack from inside the house and started toward the wash. "Hurt?" Crockett wanted to know. Yeah, I hurt," and I said sharply, clutching at my ribs. "Wanna fix it?" "What you got in mind?" I retorted sarcastically. "Know a game?" "Shit." "Come on." Crockett got up and walked into the ranch house. I followed him. For the next half hour we played his game. He instructed me to sit across from him at the table. "Now, you just pick up a spot in the center of the room, an imaginary spot, and put all your attention on it. Got it?" I nodded. "Just concentrate on that spot." "Good. Okay, now, where did it happen? The accident. Put your attention there. Visualize it. See it?" I nodded. I could visualize the rock clearly. I saw the bike. "Now come back to the center of the room." Again, I focused on the imaginary spot. "Now, where did it happen?" "On that rock." "Put your attention on that rock." Several minutes went by. "Now, come back to the center of the room." "Now, where did it happen?" Each time I focused on the scene of the accident, I saw more. I re-experienced the pain as the bike twisted and I brushed the handlebars that came down on my ribs. I felt my face scrape the ground and the chicken beneath me. "Now, come back to the center of the room." Again and again we repeated the exercise, and each time I saw more. Finally, Crockett said, "Well, where are you now?" "I'm at that rock." "Well, I told you to come back to the center of the room. Why don't you just leave that experience there and come on back here?" I looked at Crockett. Then I rubbed my hand across my ribs. I lifted up my shirt and checked my side. I felt no pain at all. There was only a small welt on my left shoulder. "When an accident happens," Crockett explained, "and pain comes on, you have a tendency to reject it, 'cause no one wants it. But once it's there, you can't really reject it. You have to experience it. It's like trying to unexperience something that already happened." As he said this, I remembered times on acid, during a bad trip, when I saw something I didn't want to see and tried to unsee it. It didn't work. So if that happened and you feel pain later, If you carry pain you didn't completely experience at the time, that pain is locked in your mind. So you got to go back and relive that pain in its proper time and place. Focus on it, so that you can leave it there where it belongs. It's just a way of making you conscious. The only reason you had the spill in the first place was most likely that you weren't there. Your head was someplace else. Maybe thinking about me up here in the shade, huh? It's 125 degrees today, you know. Crockett grinned. I picked up Brooke's guitar and went back out on the porch. Crockett's words on pain reminded me of what Charlie had said about fear. You have to accept your fears and experience them, so you can go beyond them. Lessons I had learned in the family were proof of that. Much of what I had experienced in the family prepared me for what Crockett was soon to teach me. But there was a difference between Charlie's teachings and those of Crockett. While Charlie asked that we accept and submit to his love, his will, without thinking, the assumption being that he was truth, Crockett demanded that we discover for ourselves what that truth was by being totally conscious. Ain't nothing I can tell you. Only thing I can do is steer you in a good direction. In a good direction. It's your eyes and ears and attention that got to do the finding. Charlie asked that we submit to him. Be unconscious. Crockett, that we listen to ourselves and be conscious. What Charlie sought to create were extensions of himself. I am you and you are me. What Crockett encouraged was the opposite, the discovery of individuality. That night at dinner, I told Brooks and Crockett I was staying. A few days later, I headed back to Spawn's to pick up my belongings. I found the mood even more chaotic and foreboding. What had evolved into a bad dream was about to become a nightmare. Chapter 18. I arrived at Spawn's late in the afternoon and parked behind the tack room. It was hot and muggy. The Wranglers were just quitting for the day. I recognized Shorty and Randy with their backs to me, standing with Pearl by the corral. I waved, but Pearl didn't look up. I had an impulse to go down and say goodbye, but decided against it. Danny DiCarlo was sitting in front of the saloon, drinking a beer when I walked up. Weish squatted beside him, embroidering one of Charlie's shirts. Now's the great American desert. Danny hoisted his beer in greeting. Hot. Hi, Weish. I'll drink to that. Want one? I shook my head. Charlie around? Went to Malibu to pick up Bruce, Weish said cheerily. Davis? She nodded. Where's he been? England, studying Scientology. She moved away from the door as I went inside. What are you up to, Paul? She called after me. Just come to get my boots and drop off my buckskins. Hey, DiCarlo! I heard Bill Vance's voice from the semi-trailer. You gonna lie on your butt all day, or you gonna give us a hand with this carburetor? Just like the fucking army, ain't it? Danny muttered as I came out with my stuff. He drained the dregs of the beer, then picked up the rest of the six-pack and sauntered off toward the semi-trailer where Bill, Turk, and another mechanic were standing. Weish followed him. I tossed my gear into the back of Stanley's pickup, then trotted toward George's place. "Hi, Paul." I heard the voice and turned to see Sherry and Pooh Bear step out of a tent set up on the side of Dodie's old lean-to. Then Sadie, Snake, and Brenda appeared. They were all dressed in Levi's and wore buck knives strapped to their waists. I walked over and peeked inside the tent just as Charlie and Bruce Davis wheeled into the yard in the milk truck and parked at the side of the saloon. As they got out of the truck, Charlie said something to Bruce, and he walked off towards the corral. I went down to meet Charlie. As always, he greeted me warmly, putting his arm around my shoulder. "I'm glad you're back. Real glad." Charlie wore buckskins, motorcycle boots, and a hunting knife strapped to his left hip. "Man, you know you're breaking my heart. What's happening with us?" "Nothing. It's just I want to stay out at the ranch for a while." "With that guy Crockett?" "He's there." We walked along the boardwalk. "Do me a favor. Stay the night. Stay in the tent. Did you see how I got it all fixed up over there? It's real nice. Great place to make love. You can just stay in there, you know. Snake and Brenda are there. I got to... Hey, haven't I always given you everything I got? Everything. All I have is yours, man." Night glanced at the tent and saw Snake standing in the doorway. She waved. We walked over to Stanley's truck and Charlie leaned against it, his eyes on me. He sensed then, I think, that I was really leaving and might not come back. It must have been heavy for him. I'd been a mainstay, someone he could depend on. I reflected the flower child in him. Now I was checking out. Bruce Davis, it appeared, had already assumed my position as second in command. "What about our music, man? What about Helter Skelter, the revolution?" "I'm still into the revolution, but this isn't how it used to be. All these other dudes, everyone's strung out all over the place. Where's the love? It just isn't the same." Charlie's voice was suddenly hard. "No, it ain't, man. The shit's coming down. The love thing over here, it's Helter Skelter now. And don't you forget it. And when it happens, we're coming to the desert. All of us." "Yeah, Charlie." I climbed into the truck. "But with Crockett at Barker's, you can't get up there." Charlie's eyes flashed. "Just watch me, brother." At that moment, I had no idea how dangerous a game I was playing. I swung the truck around and headed for the corral. That's when I spotted Juan Flynn leading a horse up from the creek. He called to me, and I stopped the truck. Dressed in a pair of Levi's, cowboy boots, and his battered straw hat, his powerful upper body delineated with sweat, Juan cut an awesome figure in the afternoon sunlight as he approached the truck. "Where have you been, Paul?" "Barker's." "For good, huh?" "I don't know. Scene here's getting freaky." The expression on Juan's face acknowledged his agreement. "Hey, Bo and Stephanie left too. TJ has gone. Karate Dave. Last week some black dudes come here looking for Charlie. He says he's gonna cut them up." "When you coming to the desert?" "Maybe soon. I have to work here." "Guy out there I want you to meet." Juan stepped away from the truck, and I headed for the highway. shouting to Shorty as I passed the corral. He waved his hat. It was the last time I was to see Shorty Shea. As I reached the Santa Susana Pass Road, I switched on the radio to find some music. I don't remember the exact date, but it had to be around the 25th or 26th of July, approximately 1 week before Charlie sent Bobby, Sadie, and Mary to Topanga Canyon to murder Gary Hinman. By then, I was beginning to consider Crockett a man I could learn a great deal from. Also, unconsciously, I was priming Charlie for a confrontation with Crockett. By lauding Crockett's powers, I was building my own strength. My direction, however, was by no means certain. It was more like drifting out of one orbit into another, being drawn half willingly, half unwillingly. I saw the potential for growth through Crockett's games of attention and consciousness. I had seen it work following my spill on the motorcycle. Afterward, I had told Crockett, I want to learn how to do that. I want to learn the laws of healing. Can you teach me? But he had not committed himself. He had said only that it takes time. We had made no agreements. He knew that my ties to Charlie were deep, that it would take a long time to free myself from them. Part of what drew me to Crockett was that he did not press me. Unlike Charlie, whose ego demanded that he be the center of attention, always talking, selling his rap, Crockett felt no such need. His powers were silent and unspoken, like those of the desert. For the next 2 weeks, Crockett, Brooks, and I were together constantly. We rose early, hiked up to the mines, and worked several hours before trudging back with backpacks loaded with rock. Later, with mortar and pestle, we crushed the rock, separating the gold from the quartz base. This physical labor worked wonders on us. Within a relatively short time, we were lugging out 60 and 70 pounds on our backs while scaling some of the steepest and most treacherous mountains in the Panamints. That kind of work and danger, one false step and it's 250 feet into oblivion, forces you to concentrate, to be there, to come to now. Everything we did, Crockett did with us. His body seemed indefatigable. It vexed me to see a man I considered old bounding up and down those trails without effort while I was exhausted. We planted more vegetables. Tomatoes, lettuce, squash, melons, onions, carrots, beans. We rebuilt fences, refurbished the bunkhouse, and laid a new floor in the kitchen. In the evenings, we played concentration games for hours, learning to be silent, yet in full communication with each other. Gradually, my senses revitalized. I found myself aware of sounds and smells and changes in air currents. We could hear people coming through the canyon, long before they reached the base of the wash. There were many occasions when Brooks and Crockett and I would look at each other simultaneously, acknowledging that we heard Bob and Juanita driving back from Ballarat, hours before their arrival. The desert lends itself to psychic phenomena. You become aware of plants, rocks, mountain peaks, lizards, insects. With everything so open and delineated, it's as though each entity is given its own special place in the cosmos to be, and you begin to respect that place, that organism, and the vibrations it contributes to the whole of the surroundings. At no time did we smoke dope or use drugs of any kind. I began to understand how Crockett could put up a psychic barrier on the entrance to Goler Canyon. Once, when I asked him about it, he said, "Well, we have created a beautiful place here. A good life. We don't want no one coming in here to mess it up. Unless people come with true love in their hearts, well, it don't make any sense us having anything to do with them." When Brooks asked Crockett what love was, he said, "Love is just allowing someone to be. The granting of beingness." Crockett wasn't a musician, but he agreed to help Brooks and me with our music. He said it was important we had a goal, and that music was a good one. The only instrument we had with us at the time was Brooks's guitar, and it only had 4 strings. So I cut a piece of bamboo and made a flute and taught myself to play it. In the evenings, we sat outside on the porch and played. Crockett told us to project our music to the surroundings. "Play to them rocks up there. Play to the trees. Project your sounds to what you see around you so they can feel it too. Sounds are just vibrations of feeling, and if you give them spontaneously and consciously, well, then I don't see why you can't make beautiful music. There ain't no formulas for music, no set ways." What Crockett said about music was very much like what Charlie taught us: to improve and be loose, to tune with the flow of energy, and just use the instrument to project it. But Crockett said more. "The rhythm of life," he insisted, "can be understood in terms of cosmic octaves and laws of 7. The scale. All life is conditioned in action. It's no accident, you know, that the word do is the same as the first note of the musical scale, do. The scale begins with do and ends with do. And that, you see, is the very pulse of life. Like they say, the beat just goes on. When you play music consciously with that kind of awareness, you realize what power it really has. It's like them walls of Jericho. Music brought them right to the ground. Music can bring down a lot of walls. It's the harmony you make when you mine ore out of the mountains. That clear precision of sound that lets you inside the mystery. You hit that pick just right, and the sound takes you right up the musical scale to the jackpot. One evening, around 6:30, I was by myself on the porch. We're up at the mine, and Juanita and Bob were in the bus. I was playing my flute, trying to project the sound across the garden and beyond it to the fig trees. I was completely absorbed in the sounds and the touch of my fingers on the stops. But I noticed a lizard at the far end of the porch, basking in the last of the sunlight. And after a time, he crawled over to me and just stayed there by my leg while I played. A little while later, he crawled up on my leg, just tilting his head from time to time. Finally, he crawled up my arm and across my hand, and out onto the flute, looking into the holes, curious, I guess, as to where those sounds were coming from. It was only when I moved my hand and started laughing that he shot down my arm and dropped to the floor before crawling through a crack in the porch. Sometime around August 3rd, Stanley Barry, Bob's brother, drove up to the ranch to tell us he'd located a good mining prospect in the Magillian Mountains at northern Arizona, and that we should go down there and check it out. We talked it over one evening during dinner and decided to make the trip. Stanley left the next morning, saying he'd meet us in Kingman at his brother Tom's place and that we could start from there. We left 2 days later. We stopped in Las Vegas to buy supplies and a few mining tools. Bob drove while Juanita and Crockett sat with him up front. Brooks and I rode him back. The drive from Vegas past Lake Mead is a scenic one. And after days of hard work, Brooks and I were enjoying it. We sat on a mattress with our backs against the cab of the truck, discussing the prospects of a meeting between Charlie and Crockett. I asked Brooks if he thought Charlie and Crockett would get along. He shrugged. I doubt it, but I'd sure like to see them together. I think Big Paul would blow Charlie's mind. Charlie says he's coming. Yeah, when Helter Skelter comes down, he'll be trying. Think Crockett will ever agree to that? Told me he wants to meet Charlie sometime. Charlie might blow Crockett's mind. Yeah. At that moment, both Brooks and I turned around to see Crockett looking at us through the rear window. He had a big grin on his face. For the next week, we waited for Stanley. While Brooks and I roamed around Kingman, Crockett stuck pretty close to Tom's, reading and playing solitaire. But he was getting angry. By the end of the week, he was arguing with Bob. Don't your brother know what a telephone is? He'll be here, Bob said. We'll wait one more day. I said he'll be here. After tomorrow, I won't. On Saturday, August 9th, 1969, while Brooks, Crockett, Juanita, and I drank iced tea and watched a late TV report on the Apollo 11 first moon landing, which had taken place the week before. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian paid a visit to 10,050 Cielo Drive in Bel Air to do a job for Charlie. The following morning at breakfast, we saw another news broadcast describing the slaughter of 5 people and an unborn child. Crockett was seated at the table across from me, sipping his coffee. Brooks was to his left, and Bob and Juanita were still in bed. The newscaster had finished his brief report, closing with a remark about how bloody the murders had been, and that Roman Polanski, the husband of Sharon Tate, had not been available for comment. Crockett lit a cigarette and looked at me, exhaling as he did so. Wouldn't it be something if old Charlie did that? I looked at Brooks, who was wiping egg from his platter with a piece of toast. Nah, he said. No way. But Crockett's crack bothered me. Impulse to him was to call him on it. Where did he get off saying a thing like that? He didn't know Charlie. He didn't know the family. He was just a wise-ass miner with a big mouth and a lot of games. Yet, when he said it, a chill ran through my body. What's the matter, Paul? Crockett asked. Nothing, except you got a rotten sense of humor. In retrospect, I see my reaction to Crockett's remark as an expression of my own uncertainty. Had I truly believed it impossible, I would have forgotten it at once and regarded it, as Brooks said, as a bad joke. Yet, in some respects, Crockett was indirectly attacking me. Since Charlie and the family were one, any comment regarding Charlie was applicable to us. If Charlie's trip had become murder, which I wouldn't consciously allow myself to believe, despite his talk about showing Blackie, then all of us were in some sense a part of it. Months later, I would ask Crockett about the remark. He said he remembered making it, but that he hadn't really thought it was true. It's just that sometimes something comes into your head, and you say it, and it don't make any sense, and you don't really believe it, but you still say it. It's kind of an impulse. I found that sometimes them impulses are right, and sometimes they're not. But I like to give 'em a chance. Fact is, I never thought of old Charlie as a murderer until I finally come up to him face to face. The next day, when Stanley failed to show, we loaded the truck. Bob got angry and said he and Juanita were going back to Barker's to get their stuff and split. Crockett said that was a fine idea. In Vegas, we bought a newspaper. That's when we read about the LaBianca murders. According to the article, the police did not believe the Tate and LaBianca murders were related. The article said further that a suspect for the Tate murders was in custody. They did not say that on the door of the refrigerator in Lino LaBianca's house 2 words had been written in blood. Helter Skelter. From Vegas, we drove across the Pahrump Valley into. Bob stopped so that Juanita could buy some cigarettes. That we filled up with gas and headed north. We weren't 20 miles out of town when a sheriff's patrol car screamed down upon us and nearly ran Bob off the road. 2 khaki-clad officers leapt out of the car with shotguns. Moments later, we were all lined up along the roadside with our hands up. The shorter, stockier cop waved the shotgun at us. He looked like a madman. "Don't any of you move, by Jesus, or I'll blow your goddamn heads off."